have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Retained EU law, revocation and reform bill, consideration of Lord's amendments.
Now,
We will begin with the government motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 6, with which we will consider the other amendments listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 6. Michael Tomlinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the amendment to the Lord's Amendment 6. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a great pleasure to be able to open this debate on their Lordships' amendments to the bill. And the bill, of course, is a vital part of the government's agenda to regulate in a smarter, innovation-friendly way that will grow the UK economy. And we've already taken advantage of many of the opportunities that leaving the European Union has created. And Brexit offers us the opportunity to rethink how and when we regulate from first principles. And of course, this includes ridding the statute book of unnecessary and burdensome retained EU laws through a process of revoke and reform, whilst always applying the same rigorous scrutiny to wider regulations that have accumulated over time to ensure that they are fit for purpose and a benefit to the UK. Of course I give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Does he not believe that actually the government's approach is not just sound, it's robust, because we want to ensure that we examine each piece of EU legislation before discarding it? And secondly, given that we already, what with coming legislation, will have got rid of over half of the EU retained law by the end of the year.
Indeed, to my honourable friend for intervening so early in this debate and for making two very important points. He is absolutely right, and I will of course turn to the detail of those 2 points, but on the substance he is 100% correct, and I hope as he hears me develop my points he will agree with the approach that is being taken even more. I strongly agree, and yes, of course I give way.
For giving away, he will know that one of the things that the government's trying to get rid of is the Lord's Amendment 15, which reinstates the principle of non-regression. Can he explain to me what is so burdensome about agreeing to a non-regression clause, given that the government keeps saying it has no intention of weakening our environmental or food standards? If that really is the case, then why on earth would he be against a non-regression principle? Isn't it because actually the government probably does have some ideas about weakening some of our standards?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her intervention. She intervenes at a very early stage in the debate. I haven't even made the concluding remarks to my preamble, let alone turning to the individual amendments themselves. Of course I will turn to those amendments. She won't be surprised to hear that I disagree with her, and I hope that she will bear with me and listen as I develop my points in respect to that specific amendment. But of course, this is not specifically about cutting burdens to benefit business. We're doing this because ensuring that markets function properly will benefit each and every one of our constituents as consumers and citizens of this country. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must ask which regulations have worked, which require scrapping, and which can be reformed. Smarter regulation leads to improved growth and to a stronger economy. I'll be delighted to give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I expressed reservations about the sunset clause from the outset, that the practicalities of meeting such a tight deadline are always going to be difficult. So I understand why the government has got to where it is on this, but I hope he'll assure the House that even with the removal of the deadline provided by the previous sunset clause, we will see the government working hard to deliver the kind of regulatory review, reform and improvement of retained EU law that he's talking about, because he is right, it is crucial for economic success.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for her intervention, and may I pay tribute to her for her work in this area over a long number of years. And I hope that work, in fact, continues, and that we can perhaps encourage her to put forward her own suggestions as to those regulations that need scrapping, those that need reforming, and those, frankly, that have worked and that we need to hold on to. And I hope also that she's reassured when we come to the specific government amendments, that the approach that we are taking does adopt exactly what she has envisaged. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I turn to the amendments, it's clear that we are also fully taking back control of our laws and ending the supremacy, as we are, and the special status afforded to retained EU law by the end of 2023. We are ending the inappropriate entrenchment of EU law concepts in domestic statute. For centuries, our legal systems have developed through common law and case law principles. Indeed, the UK is home to perhaps the most respected legal jurisdictions in the world, not least thanks to our strong judiciary. And crucially, it is because of our world-renowned common law legal system, because it is clear, fair and predictable, and it is based on precedent. So, of course I'll give way.
Welcome, and it's great to see so many government ministers have taken an interest in this bill over the course of its parliamentary lifestyle. But everything that he's outlining, the government, this place, was supposed to already have the powers to do by taking back control from Brussels. Anything he's saying could be done by primary legislation. It doesn't need the sweeping powers that this bill is still granting it, much as my constituents in Glasgow North welcome the removal of the cliff edge, which they were repeatedly warned about at previous stages, and his predecessors were warned about at previous stages of this bill.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, but the fact is, this is a framework bill. This is ending the supremacy and the special status. It is an important point afforded to retained EU law. The reason there are so many on this side is because we welcome that fact. We welcome the fact that the supremacy and special status afforded to retained EU law is ending by passing this bill. I will give way, then I will make some progress.
Very grateful to the Minister. Why are there practically no important measures in the list of repeals to make life better and to make us more prosperous? Why, for example, are we not making a big increase in the VAT threshold, now we're free to do so that we can liberate and expand many more of our small businesses?
Grateful to my right honourable friend for his intervention. I know he has spent a lifetime working on these issues, and I do look forward to him continuing to contribute to this debate. But the fact of the matter is, by having a schedule, you can set out incredibly clearly what laws are going to be sunset and when. I'm going to turn to this point in a moment, and it also gives certainty. But what importantly it does not do is prevent us from further reforms in due course. And I will turn to that point in a few minutes. Let me make a little bit of progress, and of course I will give way in due course. Turning to Amendment 1. It's an amended version of an initial government amendment. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government tabled this amendment at the Lords' report stage to remove the automatic nature of the sunset clause, as we have already heard. This approach will provide legal certainty on which EU laws will fall away at the end of the year, and will ensure that Parliament, ministers and officials are freed to focus on more reform of retained EU law and to do so faster. And if I could respond further to my right honourable friend, that is the great advantage of this approach. We are not going to be upstairs in statutory instruments, DL bill committees between now and the end of the year. Instead, we can focus important time looking at where we want to make real and proper reforms. The goals of this bill to enable revocation and reform and to end the supremacy and the special status of retained EU law remains fully intact. I give way to the Honourable Lady first, and then, of course, I'll give way in due course to my Honourable friend.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I may be, hopefully, defending the rights of the member for Stone and indeed for Wokingham, because isn't it the case, and the Minister's just there said how wonderful it will be that we won't even be in these SI committees, that members of this House who have strong feelings about any of this legislation will be reduced to pleading through questions sessions such as this, or perhaps trying to catch a minister in the lobby, or lobbying one of those backroom civil servants to try and write the SIs that are being put forward. that this piece of legislation might set out what the government is going to revoke at this point in time, but it still gives the government, without any scrutiny in this chamber and any opportunity for any MP to put forward proposals, the opportunity to challenge them. That isn't taking back control, it's giving it away.
Entirely with the Honourable Lady. I know that she's an assiduous member of this House. I've served on many bill committees with her, and I know quite how seriously she takes her work and this role. And in fact, I know that she would not be unwilling, as indeed would I, to sit upstairs on SI committees, but only if it's necessary. If it's not necessary, and if all it's doing is effectively retaining the status quo, then it is much better to free up parliamentary time, to free up ministerial and official time, to look at where real reform can be made. I promise to give way to my honourable friend, and then of course I will give way to my honourable friend and neighbour.
I'm most grateful. I'd just simply like to ask the Minister, or the Solicitor General, if he would be good enough to give some kind of an indication or an assurance that he may be able to give to the European Scrutiny Committee in the light of recent events, but also in terms of its interaction with the bill and its outcome and its operation.
I'm very grateful indeed to my honourable friend, and he preempts me because I am going to turn to the important role of the European Scrutiny Committee, but I know he'll forgive me because I think it's important to take it in proper order, so I will come to that point in due course. I now give way to my honourable friend and neighbour, the member for North Dorset.
Very grateful to my honourable and learned neighbour for giving way. Could I just urge him from the box, because I think there's a lot of our constituents who want to get behind the government's strategy on this. And they want to have the confidence that this is going to be done in a calm, measured, sensible way. In recent times, more radically siren voices have suggested the sort of Singaporeisation of life and just everybody getting on and no regulations and bonfires of this, that and the other, which have slightly scared the horses. So from the dispatch box, can you just give that comfort to, I think, a large number of people in this country who get the job that needs to be done in hand, but want the assurance that it is going to be done in the calm, timely, reflective way that my honourable learned friend has set out, because I don't think that message has, that change of tone and approach has quite been articulated strongly enough by ministers and therefore not understood clearly enough by constituents.
I am very grateful indeed to my honourable friend for his intervention and, as ever, for his assiduous attention to these matters. And he is right. And let me give an example and hopefully the assurance that he is seeking. For example, in relation to DEFRA. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an important point. DEFRA's default approach will be to retain the substance of retained EU law unless there is good reason either to repeal or reform it. And this allows us to keep protections in place, but it also provides certainty to businesses and to stakeholders as well. And my honourable friend will know and will appreciate that our high standards were never dependent solely on our membership of the European Union. And I'll turn back to that theme in due course. But the schedule itself, turning back to the schedule, this changes the way that the sunset operates, but it still ensures that we are and will continue to remove unnecessary and burdensome EU laws by the end of the year. And I want to reassure members that this schedule is not a limit to our ambition for reform of EU law. We have the power to continue to amend the EU laws so that more complex regulation can still be revoked or reformed as we require. And departments will still be required to continue to review retained EU laws not already reformed or planned for revocation this year. And this will identify further opportunities for reform or revocation. My right honourable friend, the member for North East Somerset, drove vital change by ensuring that there was a catalogue of retained EU law on the dashboard. And I'm going to come back to this point later on. But that is critical because much of what is not clearly appropriate for the UK is listed and is publicly available for all to see. The schedule will thus allow us to remove legislation inherited from the EU that is either already redundant or that the UK no longer requires. It's simply an efficient and transparent way of dealing with this. I won't for the moment. I'm just going to make some progress because I am conscious that a number of people do want to speak in this debate. All retained EU law in the schedule will be revoked on the 31st of December 2023. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's a clear additional advantage to a schedule, and this is the point that I made earlier to the Honourable Lady. Rather than using precious parliamentary time passing statutory instruments to save laws that no one would ever let sunset, it is right to be clear in a schedule what retained EU law will be revoked, whilst letting the rest be reformed. And so instead of focusing on passing significant numbers of SIs just to preserve the status quo, the schedule will allow this government to get on with reforming and revoking regulations that are not fit for purpose for the United Kingdom. And of course I give way to my right honourable and learned friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable and learned friend, who's bringing me a lot of déjà vu back as one of his predecessors dealing with EU withdrawal and retained EU law. More of that later. I want to ask him about the point he's just made. Wasn't there a danger that in confusing haste with speed, that we were in effect going to end up in a cut and paste operation here, where civil servants were just going to replicate existing SIs and leave them on the statute book for some undefined date in the future to be reformed? And is now his approach one that is guaranteed to avoid that unhappy set of circumstances from coming about?
I'm very grateful indeed to my right honourable friend and my predecessor, who indeed has spent many hours at this dispatch box debating such legislation as this over the past years, and he is absolutely right. This gives the opportunity to allow the government to get on with reforming and revoking rather than the cut and paste that my right honourable friend has just referred to. And we want to expand both the scrutiny and the breadth of experience that we are drawing on when it comes to revocation and reform. And my honourable friend, the member for Stone, anticipated this point, and I thank him for the work that he and his committee, and there are a number of members on his committee in the chamber today, and I thank them for the work that they have done. Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, formerly I was a member of that committee, and the government looks forward to engaging with the European Scrutiny Committee, and I am pleased to give my honourable friend a commitment that we will present a report to the European Scrutiny Committee on a 6-monthly basis on the progress and plans the government is making on the repeal of retained EU law. Any retained EU law not included on the schedule will be stripped of EU interpretive effects after the 31st of December 2023. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to repeat that point. It's important to expand both the scrutiny and the breadth of experience, and that's what the Secretary of State herself has said from this dispatch box and elsewhere. This is vitally important, and it means that we'll still be removing the effects of general principles of EU law as an aid to interpretation, ceasing the application of supremacy and repealing directly effective EU rights so that they no longer have any effect in relation to those provisions. Well, I will give way.
It's very generous of him to give way. When it comes to this schedule, he keeps talking about getting rid of laws that are burdensome or unnecessary, but caught up in that schedule, among many other things, are the national emission ceiling regulations, which require the government to prepare and implement, review and critically consult on tackling air pollution at source. The government says it doesn't need to do this via this legislation, it's going to do it instead via the environmental improvement plans, and yet we know that those plans are vague and they don't include that element of public consultation. So how can he guarantee that all of those regulations that are caught up in the 600 that he's now trying to get rid of, or 900, how is he going to be able to be sure that he's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Because on air pollution, he absolutely is. And we know that air pollution in this country, we're not even meeting our existing targets, much less watering down or risking junking other ones that we ought to be abiding by.
I think I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I am going to come back to this point in due course. But she will have seen that there's an explainer to the schedule, to each and every one of the 587 regulations that are on the schedule. And it's clear that in the vast majority of the case, they are simply redundant. They are not needed. And it seems from her intervention that she has already had the answer from the government that answers the point completely. And I will come back to our Environment Act in due course, which will develop further the point that I am making. But turning back to Amendment 1, nothing in our domestic statute book will be considered as retained EU law and have the special status of retained EU law, and that will come to an end by the end of the year. Of course, there was a further amendment that was passed in the other place, and in my respectful submission, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is unprecedented. It is unprecedented, unnecessary and unacceptable. And so we must have the ability to use this primary legislation to revoke unneeded and unwanted legislation. It's not necessary. Let me just finish this point, and yes, of course I will. It's not necessary to invent a new procedure to simply review a revocation schedule. And of course I give way to my honourable friend, the Chairman of the Select Committee.
I'm very grateful to my honourable learned friend for giving way. And can I welcome the tone and approach which he is bringing to this, as I welcome the government's movement of getting rid of the sunset clause and putting in place the schedule, which is obviously the right thing to do. But my concern around the Lord's amendment to Amendment 1 is this. He says that it's unprecedented and unnecessary and undesirable. But isn't the objective that was behind an amendment by Lord Hope, a very distinguished lawyer, and Lords Hamilton of Epsom and Hodgson of Astley-Ebbets, both of whom are friends who I know to have been lifelong Brexiteers, to have ensured that the proposal wasn't used to make substantial change to our law, as opposed to getting rid of the redundant legislation or the technical changes, which we all agree should not be going to a DL committee. What will be the government's mechanism instead to ensure that we don't get substantial change to the law without proper debate and scrutiny?
I'm grateful to the Chairman of the Select Committee for that intervention. He makes an important point, and I hope that in the next 2 paragraphs I can reassure him on some of those points. But to answer his very last point, it is here in this chamber right now, raising the sorts of points that he has done, that is part of the scrutiny process. And in my respectful submission, the amendment that was tabled in the other place actually undermines legal certainty. There is already a proportionate safeguard, namely a limited preservation power within the preferred clause, and I would draw his attention to that. And he did mention the noble Lord Hope, and I did agree with at least this part of his speech when Lord Hope said, "A quick reading of the schedule suggests that many of the items listed in it are things we can well do without." I agree with him, and in fact a longer look confirms the position. I must therefore ask the House to return this amendment to the other place with the amendment proposed. So there we go, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's the first one dealt with. A few more to go. Reporting duty. Turning now to Lord's Amendment 16, tabled by my noble friend Baroness Noakes, supported by my noble friends Lord Jackson of Peterborough, Lord Frost and Baroness Lawler. We have, of course, listened to concerns raised, and I can assure the House that the Government has not moved 1 inch from its bold ambitions. We remain committed to securing swift and significant reform that brings tangible benefits to the UK economy. And that's why I'm asking the House not only to agree with the reporting amendment sent to us by the other place, but actually to improve upon it. And our own amendment will increase the frequency of reporting to every 6 months. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that accountability to this House and the other place is the best way of ensuring that the Government keeps progressing on its priorities and that my right honourable friend and others are reassured. Mr Speaker, I am also delighted to support the amendment of my honourable friend, the member for Stone, which will ensure that the Government reports to both Houses not just on reform progress, but also what retained EU law will be reformed and what will be revoked. In the spirit of this amendment, I'm pleased to say that the Government has already reformed and revoked over 1,000 pieces of retained EU law. And this comes back to my honourable friend's point at the outset. This includes more than 450 pieces that we have repealed, replaced or let expire, as well as 650 more which we have amended. And once again, we can follow all of this thanks to my right honourable friend, the member for North East Somerset, and thanks to his dashboard. Indeed, upon our exit from the EU, a number of departments proactively revoked or amended regulations that contain deficiencies as a result of the UK's exit from the EU. DEFRA has already reformed key areas of retained EU law through flagship legislation such as the Environment Act, the Agriculture Act, the Fisheries Act, and I'm delighted that the Attorney-General is here hearing so loudly from a sedentary position because she took those through, or at least some of them, through this House, and I'm grateful to her for that. The revocation schedule will build on this and will facilitate reform in key sectors. This is far from the limit of the government's ambitions. Across Whitehall, departments will continue to review the retained EU law not already revoked or reformed, and we are committed to reducing burdens on business and unlocking economic growth.
Of course. I thank the Solicitor General for giving way. I should note my register of interests as chair of the Regulatory Reform Group. He's making a very good case for explaining not just the approach in this narrow area of EU law, but how we need to integrate that with a broader programme of improving the regulatory system. Would the Solicitor General give his views to the proposals from the Regulatory Reform Group, which talk about the importance of improving our regulatory system to improve accountability and responsiveness from the regulators as they have a lot of duties under the primary legislation?
Very grateful indeed to my honourable friend for his intervention, and may I pay tribute to him too for all of his work in this area. He will have heard the Secretary of State's call for greater scrutiny and for a breadth of experience that she is determined to draw upon, and I'm sure she will draw upon my honourable friend's experience as well, and he is right, because we are committed to reducing burdens on business and to unlocking economic growth. And so I would ask all honourable and right honourable members to support Amendments 5A and 5B. Turning now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to Lord's Amendment 6. This amendment undermines a fundamental plank of the bill, namely the ending of the special status of retained EU law on our statute book by repealing Section 4 of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018. The matters saved by Section 4 consist largely of retained rights, obligations and remedies developed in the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union. The vast majority of these rights overlap with rights that we already have. These overlaps can cause confusion and legal uncertainty. By not repealing Section 4 and instead replacing it with an unclear parliamentary procedures, the amendment would create the very legal uncertainty that was previously criticised. And this is the point. The bill should end the current situation where, to understand and enforce their rights, citizens must decipher and the implications of a high-level legal principle giving effect to an ill-defined right or set of rights. The proposed amendment does the exact opposite. The honourable gentleman, I know, will forgive me because I have been a very long time and I must make some progress. It perpetuates this situation, which is unacceptable to the government and, I would hope, unacceptable to the House.
Sorry, can I press the Solicitor General to give way on that?
Of course I give way to my old friend.
The Solicitor General says it's unacceptable to the government, and I understand some of the points that he makes again. But can he help on this one point that was raised in the upper house around this? And it's the risk, and actually, contrary to the government's belief, there is a risk of legal uncertainty because whilst the government rightly has a revocation list of legislation, there isn't a revocation list of rights that may be in another form, and that therefore the concern was raised, the risk of deleting almost unidentified law unintentionally. Now, I'm sure the Solicitor General has an answer to that, and I'd like to hear it, but at the moment I don't see why the government is so exercised about this clause, again, proposed by people who are both distinguished in the law and firm Brexiteers.
Well, as the Chairman of the Select Committee knows, I pay enormous deference to those who are experienced in the law, not least to himself as long-standing Chairman of the Select Committee. But he heard my response that my concern, the government's concern, is that we are replacing it, or this amendment would replace it, with unclear parliamentary procedures. And in fact, in my submission, it would create the very uncertainties, the very legal uncertainties that have been previously criticised. And which is why I suggest to him it's unacceptable not just to the government, but it should be unacceptable to the House as well. And I suggest that the amendment proposed would actually muddy the waters. Having given way to my honourable friend, of course I give way to the honourable gentleman.
the Minister out here is really everything he's not just described. What the Government is trying to achieve is that instead of being called retained EU law, it will now just be called the law.
Well, I sort of agree, but it's a little bit of a facetious way of putting it, if I may say so, from the honourable gentleman. But there it is. To deliver clarity, to remove the principle of supremacy in international law, the House must remove this amendment and restore the original clause into the bill. I will give way, then I must make some progress.
Legal certainty. Does he not agree that it would be almost impossible to imagine how uncertain it would be if we had two sets of statute books, one of which was post-Brexit, and the other one was the retained law as passed by the European Union over all those years. And the methods of interpretation, the difference between the purposive method and our own method, is absolutely crucial to this. Does he not agree?
Yeah. Agree with my honourable friend, and he is absolutely right. That is the whole purpose of this bill, and that is the whole reason why we are ending the supremacy of the EU law, EU-retained EU law. Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to Lord's Amendment 15. This places a number of conditions relating to environmental protections and food standards which ministers must meet when intending to use the powers of this bill. This is unnecessary. Ministers have made it clear repeatedly at every stage of this bill's passage in both houses that we will not lower environmental protections or standards. Equally, the delegated powers in the bill are not intended to undermine the UK's already high standards on food, and nor will they do so. Indeed, this government is committed to promoting robust food standards nationally and internationally. Rather, we can use these powers to simplify and improve regulation, making it simpler and administratively easier to comply with without lowering standards. These types of reforms, amongst others, are vital to allow the UK to drive genuine reform and seize the opportunities of Brexit. However, no, I won't. I've given way twice, so I'm going to make progress. However, we recognise the need to protect environmental and food standards. Therefore, I would like to be clear once again, as many ministers have before me, and to confirm that this government is fully committed to upholding environmental standards and food protections. It is worth noting that DEFRA has already reformed retained EU law in key areas through flagship legislation. I've already mentioned two of them, the Fisheries Act and the Agricultural Act. Our environmental standards are world-leading, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have passed legislation designed for our own domestic environment, and it is right that we have done so. I have given way once, but not twice. So I'll give way to my honourable friend again.
You can never give way too many times to a neighbour. That's all I'll say to my honourable and learned friend. He's raising a very important point. My constituency, as he knows, is hugely agricultural. A lot of his is as well. So food standards and animal welfare is very important to very many of our constituents. And we've put on the statute book the Agriculture Act and the Environment Act and other things. Does he agree with me that there has been suspicion on this issue, but we should all take great confidence by the announcement made by our Vice Honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and by others, that when it comes to future trade deals, the lessons raised by our Right Honourable friend, the member for Campbell and Redruth, have been learnt, and therefore issues about welfare, animal welfare and standards will be at the heart of further and future free trade agreements rather than an optional extra. And that should give us the confidence.
Well, I'm grateful again to my old friend. I am glad that I gave way to him twice and didn't leave him there asking and yet not receiving an answer. But I can simply repeat the assurances that ministers have given ad nauseam, dare I say it. Our environmental standards, they are world-leading, and they will continue to be. And in reviewing its retained EU law, DEFRA's aim is to ensure that the environmental law is fit for purpose and it is able to drive improved environmental outcomes. And in light of this, I ask the House to reject this amendment. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this is the last one, if I've counted correctly. Finally, turning to Lord's Amendment 42, which inserted new paragraph 7 to Schedule 4 and would require a novel procedure to apply to the use of the powers contained in the bill. I repeat, these are novel and untested. This government does not accept the principle that Parliament should be able to amend statutory instruments. In addition, the procedure would have significant implications for both parliamentary time and the ability of government to deliver its business. It would bring significant delay to the clarification of our statute book through restatement and delay much needed regulatory reform. There is already provision for scrutiny measures within the bill. All of these powers will already be subject either to the affirmative procedure, so debated in and approved by both houses, or subject to the findings of a sifting committee in each house. This is a sufficient safeguard. The sifting procedure will provide additional scrutiny of the powers, while retaining the flexibility of using the negative procedure when there are good reasons for doing so. I therefore ask the House to reject this amendment. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have set out the Government's position today.
Point of order, Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister just suggested that amendable SIs was a novel procedure.
Stop! It is not a point of order. The Honourable Lady has tried to intervene on the Minister. The Minister has already taken her intervention. He's not taking another intervention. It is not a point of order for the Chair. And the Honourable Lady should not abuse the procedures of the House in this way. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I fear I have tried your patience for too long. I will seek to conclude. I know a number of other members and right honourable members want to catch your eye, and I will allow them to do so. I have set out the Government's position. It is one that prioritises a clear statute book that ensures that we have regulation that is fit for purpose and that works for the United Kingdom. I invite all honourable members to support the Government's motions today. I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 6. Jonathan Reynolds.
Madam Deputy Speaker,